far away, in the cold silence of deep space, there was a planet the stars had forgotten. Zarthion, a world of stone skies and silver deserts, and at its heart, a sword. Not just any sword, a blade older than memory itself, standing upright in the center of a glowing crater, its metal pulsing softly like a heartbeat. No one remembered who had forged it. No one knew why it stood there, but every alien in the galaxy knew one thing: no one could lift it. For thousands of years, warriors came, from the scaled tribes of the Catharan to the metal-born soldiers of the Urok to the shadowed hunters from beyond the moons. All came with hope, and all left with scars. The sword rejected them all. Each time a hand touched the hilt, the blade flared with blue fire and threw the challenger across the crater. It burned them, shattered them, sometimes even erased them from existence. Legends called it the Soul Blade. Others whispered it was cursed, a weapon that hated the unworthy. And so, the aliens built shrines around it. They bowed, prayed, and waited for the one who could claim it. But centuries passed, and the sword remained silent. Until, one day, a small ship fell from the sky. It wasn't a warship. It wasn't even alien. It was old, broken, and human. The crash shook the valley. Dust rose like smoke, and from the wreckage stepped a man, alone, tired, and wearing a torn spacesuit. His name was Elias Ward. A human explorer, lost in a corner of the galaxy where no human had ever set foot. He didn't know about the sword. He didn't know about the legends. He only knew his ship was dying and he needed energy, something powerful enough to restart his reactor. When he saw the crater glowing in the distance, he thought it was a power core. He didn't know it was the most dangerous object in the universe. As he climbed down into the crater, the aliens gathered around. At the edges, hundreds of eyes watched the fragile creature move closer to their sacred relic. They whispered among themselves, "A human? What is that weak flesh doing here? He will die before he reaches the sword." But Elias kept walking, step by step. The sand turned blue beneath his boots. The air felt heavy, as if time itself was holding its breath. He reached the center. The sword stood before him, taller than any man, its edge shimmering with ancient light. He looked at it quietly. No fear, just curiosity. "Maybe this can power the ship," he murmured. And then he reached out his hand. The crowd gasped. The ground rumbled. The sky darkened. The moment his fingers brushed the metal, the sword didn't burn him. Instead, it sang. A deep, echoing sound, like 1,000 voices whispering one name, Elias. The blade glowed brighter and brighter, until the whole crater turned white with light. Runes appeared beneath his feet, lines of ancient energy crawling across the ground. The aliens fell to their knees. None of them had ever seen the sword awaken. None of them had ever felt it speak. The voice grew louder, and every creature on Zarthion heard it. "At last, the worthy one returns." The air froze. Elias took a step back. What is this?" he whispered. The sword trembled, as if it had waited lifetimes just for him. And then, before the eyes of every living being there, the sword lifted itself from the ground. It rose, floating in front of him, glowing with golden fire. Every alien stared in silence. For centuries, they had fought to move it. For centuries, it had rejected their touch. But now, this fragile creature from a distant world had done what none of them could. The alien leader fell to his knees, his voice trembling. "The prophecy, the chosen one. It's true." Elias looked around, confused. He hadn't come to be a hero. He only wanted it to survive. But fate had chosen otherwise. The sword slowly turned in the air, its tip pointing toward him, as if waiting for him to take it. He hesitated. The blade glowed warmer, like it was breathing. Elias raised his hand again, his heart pounding in his chest, and when his fingers finally wrapped around the hilt, the light exploded. Every alien shielded their eyes. A wave of power spread across the valley, shaking the mountains, splitting the sky in two. When the light faded, Elias was still standing. The sword rested quietly in his hand, alive, calm, obedient. The silence that followed was deeper than fear. It was awe. Every alien knew something ancient had awakened. The sword had chosen. And it had chosen a human. The light faded, slowly, like dawn after a storm. Smoke curled in the air, the crater glowed faintly blue, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Elias stood still, the sword heavy and warm in his hands. He could feel something inside it. Breathing, a pulse that matched his own heartbeat. Around him, thousands of alien eyes watched in silence. Some were wide with fear, others shimmered with awe. But all of them knew the impossible had just happened. For the first time in 10,000 years, the ancient sword had chosen someone, and that someone was not one of them. A deep hum filled the air. The sword's light shifted, swirling like liquid fire, casting symbols into the sand, runes older than any spoken tongue. Elias blinked, trying to understand. "What is this thing?" he muttered softly. The sword answered, not in sound, but in thought. A voice, clear and ancient. "You are not ready to know, but you are the key." Elias froze, his grip tightened on the hilt. "Who are you?" he whispered. But before he could think further, a dozen alien guards surrounded him, weapons raised. "Drop the blade, off-worlder!" Their leader's voice was sharp and full of panic. "That weapon is sacred. You have no right to hold it." Elias lifted his other hand. "I don't want trouble, I just—" But the sword reacted before he could finish. A pulse of light burst from its edge, throwing the guards back like leaves in a storm. No blood, no screams, just a soundless wave, and the guards collapsed, unconscious. The crowd gasped. The alien leader's eyes burned with terror. "What manner of creature are you?" he hissed. Elias looked down at the blade. He didn't understand either. He felt power, ancient, endless power, but also a whisper of warning, a feeling that the sword was testing him. He could almost hear its voice again. Power obeys the heart, not the hand. A shadow moved among the crowd. From the far end of the crater, an older alien stepped forward, tall, cloaked, eyes glowing silver. The others bowed instantly. It was High Elder Varn, keeper of the sword's legend. He studied Elias for a long, quiet moment. Then he spoke, his voice calm yet cold. "The sword of aeons has not awakened since the war of creation. Every race has failed to claim it. And now, a human wields it?" Elias frowned. "I didn't mean to. I just touched it." Varn's eyes narrowed. "The sword never allows accidents." He stepped closer. The runes on the ground glowed under his feet. "Tell me, human, do you feel it speaking to you?" Elias hesitated. It knows my name." The elder drew a sharp breath. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind. Some aliens knelt, others fled in fear. "The prophecy," someone whispered. "The return of the builder's blood." Elias looked around, confused. "What prophecy?" Varn's face hardened. "It is said that the builders, those who shaped the stars, left behind one final heir. When the galaxy forgets its light, that heir will return and awaken the sword." Elias took a step back. "That can't be me. I'm just—" But the sword pulsed again. The runes brightened, and a vision slammed into his mind. He saw burning planets, falling ships, voices screaming across the void. A storm of darkness swallows, entire worlds. And then, a hand, human, glowing with light, lifting the sword against the shadow. Elias staggered, gasping. The vision vanished. The sword hummed softly, as if comforting him. "What did you see?" Varn demanded. Elias stared at the elder. "War, and something worse." His voice shook. "Something is coming. Varn nodded slowly. Yes, the Void Empire. They have consumed half the stars already. We prayed the sword would awaken before they reached us. But none of us were worthy. He paused, looking deeply into Elias's eyes. Now I see why it waited. The crowd began to murmur again, some hopeful, some angry. An alien soldier shouted, "He's not our savior! He's a thief!" Another cried, "The sword burns our kind, but blesses him!" The tension built like thunder. Weapons began to rise again. Elias stepped back, holding the sword protectively. "I don't want to fight you!" But the elder raised a hand. "Enough!" he roared, and silence fell. "The sword has chosen. You may hate it, but destiny does not ask for permission." Elias felt the sword's energy pulse again, and this time it whispered clearer. "They will fear you before they follow you." He shivered. "I didn't ask for this." Varn's eyes softened. "No one ever does." The elder turned to the crowd. "Prepare the council. The prophecy begins again." Then to Elias, "Human, come with me. There is much you must learn, and little time left to learn it." Elias looked at the sword one last time. The blade shimmered faintly, and within its light he saw something move. A shadowed figure, waiting, watching. He blinked, and it was gone. As he followed the elder out of the crater, the aliens parted before him, some bowing in reverence, others glaring with hatred. Above them, thunder rolled across the green sky. Storm clouds gathered around the crater's edge, and in the distance, beyond the mountains, something answered the sword's awakening. A pulse, a roar, a signal, traveling through the stars. Far away, in the cold heart of the galaxy, Adar, K-Fleet stirred. A single voice echoed in the darkness. "The sword of Aeons has awakened, and so shall we." The war for the galaxy had just begun. The storm broke across the sky like a wounded beast. Lightning tore through the clouds, and the air shimmered with static. Elias followed Elder Varn down a spiral path carved deep into the mountain. Each step echoed against the stone, slow, heavy, and full of unseen eyes. The tunnels were lit by veins of blue crystal, humming softly, alive. Ancient carvings covered the walls, human shapes, building stars. Elias stopped, brushing dust from one of the murals. "These look human," he whispered. Varn nodded without turning. "They are, the first builders, the ones who came before us all." Elias frowned. "Before you? Before every alien race?" "Yes." Varn's voice lowered to a near whisper. "Your kind created the stars," Elias swore, then vanished into the dark. The words struck him like cold iron. "That's impossible." "Is it?" the elder replied softly. "The sword would not have awakened for a lie." They reached a massive chamber at the end of the tunnel. A circular hall, filled with floating stones inscribed with glowing text. At its center burned a single, silent flame, blue and weightless. "This is the vault of the builders," Varn said. "Only those chosen by the sword may enter." Elias looked around, the sword in his hand thrumming louder now, as if recognizing its birthplace. Then, the chamber walls shifted. The stones began to spin slowly, rearranging into patterns of light. A voice echoed, faint, mechanical, ancient. "Heir of the builders detected, unlocking memory archive." The floor vanished beneath Elias's feet. He fell, not into darkness, but into memory. He was standing in a city of glass towers and burning suns. Humans, thousands of them, walked among alien races in harmony. Ships moved through light gates, traveling between worlds like whispers. Then came the shadow. A wave of black clouds devouring planets, turning light into silence. He saw a last desperate act. A group of humans forging the sword, pouring their souls into its heart. A woman's voice, trembling but strong. "One day, a child of our blood will find this blade, and it will awaken the light once more." The vision shattered. Elias fell to his knees, gasping, drenched in sweat. Varn stood beside him, eyes filled with fear and awe. "You saw it, didn't you?" Elias nodded slowly. "I saw the end. and the beginning. The sword in his hand pulsed again, once, like a heartbeat. And for the first time, Elias felt it not as a weapon, but as a soul. Before he could speak, the chamber trembled. Cracks spread across the ceiling. A deep, rumbling growl echoed from above. Varn's face went pale. "They've found us." "Who?" Elias asked, standing quickly. "The Void Empire." The elder ran to a glowing console, striking runes in panic. "Your awakening sent a signal. They followed it." A booming sound filled the cavern, distant, metallic, like thunder trapped inside iron. The mountain shook again. Elias and Varn rushed outside, and there, across the alien horizon, dozens of black ships descended through the clouds, sharp as blades, trailing fire. "They're not wasting time," Elias muttered. Varn's guards took positions, their weapons glowing red. Energy cannons charged across the city's walls, but everyone knew they weren't ready. The sword began to hum again, vibrating in Elias's grip. He looked at it, uncertain. "You want me to fight them?" A voice answered inside his head, calm, powerful, ancient. "You were not chosen to fight, Elias Ward. You were chosen to remember." "Remember what?" he whispered. "That power serves only those who stand for life." He looked up at the sky, the black ships breaking through the clouds, their lights like hungry eyes. Varn shouted over the roaring wind, "Get to the Citadel! We can protect you there!" Elias didn't move. He stared at the sword, feeling its energy rising. The glow spread up his arm, tracing his veins like molten gold. The nearest void ship opened fire, a beam of red energy tearing across the valley. Elias raised the sword instinctively. The beam hit and vanished. The sword drank the energy, absorbed it, and released a wave of blue light that rippled through the air. The ground cracked open. The sky lit up like day. When the smoke cleared, the ship was gone, not destroyed, erased. Everyone stared at Elias in stunned silence. Even he couldn't breathe. The sword whispered again, "One spark can reignite the stars." He looked at Varn, his voice trembling. I just declared war." Varn nodded grimly. "Then may the stars guide you, human, for the galaxy will never be the same." Above them, the remaining void ships shifted formation, 1,000 black eyes turning toward him. And somewhere within their flagship, a figure cloaked in shadows watched the scene unfold. Its voice was like metal grinding on bone. "So, the heir has awakened." The figure turned toward the darkness behind him. "Prepare the Legion. The Builder's blood must end forever." The stars flickered, the ground trembled, and Elias tightened his grip on the sword, unaware that with each heartbeat the blade was slowly binding itself to his soul. The storm was not over. It was only beginning. The night on Zarthion burned like a wound in the sky. Dark clouds rolled and twisted, turning lightning into veins of red fire. From the highest spires of the alien city, alarms howled like dying beasts. Elias stood on the edge of the mountain citadel, the ancient sword glowing in his hand. Below him, thousands of alien citizens fled through the narrow silver streets, their eyes lifted to the sky, where the Void Empire's fleet hung like a storm of black suns. The air trembled. One by one, the enemy ships opened. Huge metallic creatures, part machine, part shadow, descended from the clouds. Their wings cut through the wind with shrieks that sounded almost alive. Varn stepped beside Elias, robes whipping in the cold air. His voice was low, full of dread. "They've come for the sword. For you." Elias clenched the hilt tighter. "Then they're not leaving with either." The elder turned toward him sharply. "Do not be a fool. You do not yet understand the weapon you hold. That sword has ended empires." Elias's eyes flickered with the sword's glow. "Then maybe it can end one more." Varn's expression softened for a moment. "You carry the blood of gods, Elias Ward. But remember, gods fell too." Before he could answer, the first of the void creatures struck. It landed on the mountain like a meteor, a black-armored beast, 10 feet tall, its body covered in molten chains. Where its face should have been was only a mask of smooth, shining metal. It raised a weapon that pulsed like a living heart. Elias barely had time to react. A beam of energy cut across the stone courtyard, sending shards of glowing rock flying through the air. He rolled aside, the heat burning through his suit. The sword moved on its own. A streak of blue light flashed across his vision, and the beast was cut cleanly in two. It didn't fall. It simply disappeared. The sword hummed softly, satisfied, as if it had tasted something familiar. Elias stood, breathing hard, staring at the blade. "What are you?" A voice echoed in his mind again, ancient, calm, unshakable. "I am what remains of those you've forgotten." Another beast landed, then 2, then 10. Their red eyes glowed in the smoke. Elias took a step back, the ground shaking beneath his boots. "Elder!" he shouted. "Get the civilians out!" Varn nodded, raising his staff. Blue energy burst from the runes, creating shimmering portals of light. The aliens began to vanish through them, one by one. Elias turned back to the swarm. He didn't think, he simply moved. The sword became an extension of his body, its arc leaving trails of light that sliced through the darkness. Every strike was perfect. Every swing was guided by something greater. The aliens watching from the walls began to chant softly, their fear turning into awe. But even as he fought, Elias could feel something strange. The sword wasn't just helping him. It was learning him. Every move he made, every thought, every emotion, it absorbed it all. And deep inside, a whisper grew louder. Power obeys the heart, not the hand. Then, suddenly, a shadow darker than the night fell across the battlefield. The air grew still. The remaining beasts froze, backing away. Elias looked up. A colossal shape descended from the mothership, a creature of armor and mist, twice the size of any other, its body covered in ancient symbols that shimmered red. The air burned as it landed. Its voice echoed like thunder made of iron. "Human," it growled. "You carry the weapon that ended the First Age. Return it, and I may grant you mercy." Elias took a step forward, sword blazing. "Sorry, mercy isn't in my nature." The creature raised its massive blade, black as space itself. And then, the world exploded into light. The two swords clashed, blue and red colliding in a burst that split the sky open. The shockwave shattered windows miles away. Mountains cracked. Lightning screamed across the horizon. Elias was thrown backward, landing hard against the stone. Pain shot through his chest, but he didn't let go. The sword pulsed, energy rushing into his veins. His eyes flickered with golden light. The creature laughed, the sound deep and cruel. "Your kind was destroyed once before. You think one man can stand against eternity?" Elias rose, slowly, the wind howling around him. "I don't need to stand against eternity, just long enough to break it." He charged. The two collided again, their blades locking in a storm of sparks and sea creams. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to stop. Then the sword spoke, not in thought, but aloud, through Elias's voice. "I am the will of the builders, and your darkness ends tonight." A flash of blue fire tore through the battlefield. The creature screamed, dissolving into ash and shadow. The explosion echoed for miles. When it cleared, only Elias stood, his armor cracked, his eyes dim, the sword trembling in his grip. He fell to one knee. Varn ran to him, helping him stand. "You're alive!" Elias looked up at the burning sky. The void ships were retreating, but he could feel it. This wasn't victory. It was a warning. "They'll come again," he said quietly. "Stronger, smarter." Varn nodded grimly. "And you will not face them alone." The elder turned toward the city's towers, where beacons of blue light began to ignite one by one. A signal, calling every free world to arms. The age of silence had ended, and the legend of the human who lifted the sword was just beginning to spread across the stars. But far beyond their reach, in the black heart of the void, something older than both light and life opened its eyes for the first time in eons. and it whispered, almost lovingly, "Let the air rise, so he may fall." The galaxy shivered, and the true war had only begun. The dawn came blood-red over Zarthion. The smoke from the night's battle still hung like ghosts over the mountains, and the air smelled of metal, ash, and fear. Elias stood on the balcony of the alien citadel, the ancient sword resting against the rail beside him. Its surface still glowed faintly, whispering in a voice he could almost, but not quite, understand. Below, the alien city moved like a wounded animal. Buildings were half collapsed, the skyports burned, and across the streets, thousands of survivors worked in silence. They bowed their heads when Elias passed, not in reverence, but in uncertainty. They didn't know if the human with the impossible sword was their savior or their doom. Varn appeared behind him, robes torn, staff dim. "The scouts report the Void Fleet has withdrawn," he said quietly. "But their signal continues in the upper atmosphere. They're calling for reinforcements." Elias didn't look away from the horizon. "They'll come back. They always do." Varn sighed. "Yes. And next time, they won't underestimate you." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You wield power that none of us can measure. The sword answers only to you, Elias Ward. But if you lose control, even once, it will consume you, as it consumed the builders before you." Elias turned to him, eyes shadowed. "I've already seen what it can do. When I fought that thing last night, it wasn't me fighting." The sword hummed, as if listening. Varn's gaze hardened. "Then learn to make it yours before it makes you its vessel." Before Elias could answer, a young alien guard ran into the chamber, gasping for breath. "Elder Varn, something's happening in the crater." The two exchanged a look. Without another word, they ran. The crater where the sword had once slept was no longer quiet. The sand glowed crimson, and strange patterns twisted across the ground, runes neither of them recognized. At the center, the earth pulsed as if something below were trying to breathe. Varn raised his staff. This shouldn't be possible. The sword's energy should have sealed the sight. Elias stepped closer. The runes flared brighter. "It's reacting to something," he murmured. Then, suddenly, a shockwave of red light burst from the ground. Elias raised the sword, deflecting the surge, but the air filled with a sound like breaking glass. Dozens of ghostly figures appeared in the smoke, tall, thin, wearing armor made of starlight. Their faces were blank, their eyes black voids. Varn's voice trembled. "Echoes from the First War." The phantoms turned toward Elias. One stepped forward, its voice a low, distant whisper. "The air wields the blade of aeons, but he does not yet know its price." Elias's pulse quickened. "What are you?" "We are the memories of those who forged it, and you walk the same path that destroyed us." Before Elias could move, the phantoms surrounded him, their bodies dissolving into mist. They swirled around him like a storm, and his mind was flooded with visions. He saw the builders again, humans like himself, wielding light as easily as breath. He saw their armies crumble under the black sun of the void. He saw the sword, being born from the dying hearts of 12 builders. Their voices joined as one. "Let our power live on, but let none wield it without purpose." Elias dropped to his knees, gasping. The sword in his hand blazed so bright that the world turned white. When the light faded, the phantoms were gone, and in their place stood a single figure. She looked human. Her skin shimmered like glass, her eyes a deep, endless blue. When she spoke, her voice was gentle, but every word carried the weight of 1,000 years. "Elias Ward," she said, "you are the last echo of the builders. The sword recognizes your blood, but not your heart." He stared at her. "Who are you?" "I am Lyra," she said, "the sword's memory." She glanced at the blade. "You think it is your weapon, but it is a door, and the door has begun to open." The ground trembled again. A crack split across the crater, and from its depths, a voice roared, low, ancient, and full of hunger. Varn shouted, "Elias, what's happening?" Elias looked down at the sword, its glow turning from blue to a dangerous violet. Lyra's expression darkened. "You awakened the blade too soon. Now the thing imprisoned beneath this world has heard its call. A pillar of dark fire erupted from the crater. The shockwave flattened the mountains, sending rocks and dust spiraling into the air. Elias threw up a barrier of light, but the force still drove him back. Through the smoke, a shape began to rise, massive, skeletal, with eyes burning like red suns. Varn whispered in horror, the Void's firstborn, the one they called the Vurir. The creature spoke, its voice shaking the sky. At last, the sword sings again. Elias could barely hear over the storm. Lyra, how do I stop it? She met his eyes, sad, calm, final. You can't, not yet, but you can contain it. She stepped forward, placing her hand on his chest. Light poured from her palm into him. He felt knowledge, pain, and memory rush through his veins. Lyra's form began to fade. Remember this, heir of builders. To hold the sword is to hold the balance. Destroy the darkness, and you may destroy yourself. Her image broke apart into fragments of light, absorbed into the blade. Elias screamed as energy exploded from him, waves of blue and gold ripping through the air. The devourer howled, struck by the light, and for a moment, just a moment, it faltered. Then silence. When the dust cleared, the crater was empty. No Lyra, no devourer, only Elias, standing in a field of smoking glass, his eyes faintly glowing like the sword's core. Varn approached carefully. What have you done? Elias didn't answer at first. He looked up at the dark sky, and in his reflection within the sword's metal, he saw not his own face, but Lyra's. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, distant. I think I've just become the sword's keeper. The wind carried the smell of thunder and burning stone, and far above the clouds, the Void's fleet began to move again, this time not to attack, but to hunt. Because now, they knew exactly where the sword was, and this time, they would bring the darkness that even the builders once feared. The galaxy's final dawn had begun. The darkness above Zarthion deepened until it felt alive, breathing with the hum of distant engines and the weight of a coming storm. Elias stood atop the fractured tower of the citadel, his body trembling, not from fear, but from what he now carried inside him. The sword rested in his hand, but it no longer felt like metal. It pulsed with heat, like a heart beating beside his own. Sometimes it whispered his name, sometimes it whispered others. He had seen Lyra's face reflected in the blade too many times since that night, her voice echoing at the edges of his thoughts. You can't save them all, she had told him before fading into light. But now her presence clung to him like a memory that refused to die. Below, the city stirred. Refugees from across the planet had come, drawn by the rumor, the human who lifted the sword. To the desperate, Elias was a savior. To the proud alien generals, he was a threat, and to the stars themselves, he was an omen. The alien council gathered in the Hall of Echoes, a vast chamber carved into the mountain, its walls alive with ancient light. Elias entered with Varn at his side, every gaze following him. He could feel their fear, their doubt, their hunger for the power he held. One alien general, a massive creature with translucent skin and a voice like crushed stone, stood. The sword's awakening has brought doom upon us. The Void Empire marches here because of him. The hall erupted in shouts. Elias said nothing, his eyes fixed on the glowing sword that hung in the air beside him. Finally, Varn struck his staff against the floor. Silence! None of you could wield the sword. None of you were chosen. You call him the bringer of war, but perhaps he is the only one who can end it. Elias raised his head. I didn't ask to be chosen, he said quietly. But now that I am, I'll do what has to be done. If the Void wants this sword, they'll have to tear it from my hands. The council fell silent. But even as he spoke, a shadow crossed his mind. Lyra's voice, soft and mournful. You cannot fight darkness by becoming its reflection. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He wandered the halls of the citadel, past windows that looked out into a sky filled with ships, smoke, and stars. Then he heard it, a faint hum from deep within the fortress. The sword tugged lightly in his hand, pulling him toward the lower levels. He followed. The tunnels below were ancient, filled with dust and cold light. He reached a sealed gate covered in glowing symbols. When the sword touched it, the door dissolved into mist. Inside was a circular chamber, silent, empty, except for a single structure at its center, a crystalline sphere, cracked and flickering with energy. The sword pulsed harder. Elias stepped closer, and the sphere came alive. 1,000 voices screamed inside his head. Flashes of stars, fire, and collapsing worlds filled his mind. He saw the builders again, his ancestors, each one pouring their life into the sword to seal something away. And then, a single voice emerged from the chaos. Elias Ward, you have opened what was never meant to be opened. The sword jerked in his grip, the blade glowing brighter than ever. A shadow spilled out of the crystal, stretching across the floor like ink. A figure formed within it, tall, skeletal, wearing armor made of pure void. Its eyes burned like dying suns. I remember you, it hissed, its voice like a dying star collapsing in on itself. The child of the builders, the thief of their flame. Elias raised the sword. You're supposed to be dead. The creature smiled. Death is for those who were forgotten. I am Remnant, the first of the void, and I remember everything. It moved faster than thought. Elias barely blocked the strike. The impact shook the entire citadel, sending cracks up the walls. He was thrown across the chamber, the sword flickering. Remnant stalked forward. You hold a weapon forged from their souls, but do you even understand what it costs to use it? The sword spoke in Elias's mind, urgent, sharp. Do not let him touch the blade. He seeks to bind me again. Elias stood, blood dripping from his lip. Then let's see if gods can bleed. He charged. The clash filled the cavern with blinding light. Remnant strikes were like thunder. Each blow tore through air and stone. Elias met them all, sparks bursting from the impact. The sword began to sing again, a low, rising hum that made the walls vibrate. Then a voice cried out from the shadows. Elias! Varn, he had followed the trail. He raised his staff, firing a blast of blue energy that hit Remnant square in the chest. The creature stumbled, roaring. Elias saw his chance. He lifted the sword high, letting the energy flood his veins, and drove it down through Remnant's chest. A burst of light erupted, and everything went silent. When the glow faded, Remnant was gone. The sword's light dimmed. Elias collapsed to his knees, panting. Varn ran to him. Are you hurt? Elias shook his head. No, but I saw something. His voice trembled. When the sword cut him, I saw a gate, something on the other side, something waiting. Varn's face went pale. The devourer was not the last of them, was it? Elias met his eyes. No, he said quietly. It was just their messenger. Above them, the sky began to crackle again. The stars themselves seemed to shift, forming a new constellation, a spiral of black fire. The Void Empire had seen the signal, and now, the true army was coming. Elias tightened his grip on the sword. Lyra's voice whispered faintly within him, fading like a dream. The door has opened, Elias, and every star will know your name. The human closed his eyes, feeling the hum of the weapon that was now part of his soul. Somewhere deep inside, he knew what came next wouldn't just decide Zarthion's fate. It would decide the fate of creation itself. The war for the soul of the galaxy had begun. The stars above Zarthion no longer shone the way they once did. They pulsed, they watched, and somewhere beyond their light, something vast had begun to move. Elias stood in the ruins of the Citadel's council hall, its marble floor cracked, its walls glowing faintly from the sword's last burst of power. Varn lay unconscious beside the Tau Pomhei, shattered throne, while the sword hummed in Elias's grip, steady now, like a living heartbeat. He could still hear Lyra's voice echoing in his skull, faint as breath. The door is open, but it can still be closed. The problem was, Elias didn't know how. Outside, Zarthion's skies burned. The void signal, sent through the wound he'd opened when he struck Remnant, had reached the farthest edge of the galaxy. Now, the darkness was answering. It began as a whisper in the stars, then a tremor, then a fleet, vast, endless, blacker than death. Ships the size of continents glided through the void, their hulls dripping with liquid shadow. And in their center rode something worse, a single, motionless star that bled light instead of shining it. It wasn't just an army. It was a memory of extinction. Hours later, Elias stood with Varn and the last of the alien council in the city's command spire, a tower that pierced the clouds where ancient technology pulsed like veins in glass. Varn's voice was grave, steady, despite the tremor in his hands. The builders sealed the sword for a reason. If what you saw in that vision was true, the Devourer was only the beginning. The true void, the source, is waking. Elias stared at the holographic projection of the incoming fleet, each red marker representing a ship, until the screen glowed solid crimson. "There's no way to fight that," he said quietly. "Not with ships, not with armies." Varn turned to him. "Then we must find the forge." Elias frowned. "The forge?" "The place where your ancestors created the sword. It lies beyond the Veil Nebula, a region no living thing has crossed in 10,000 years. But it's the only place powerful enough to contain what you've unleashed." Elias looked down at the sword. Its surface shimmered faintly, as if it understood. He felt a pulse run up his arm, and a vision struck him, a massive strute. Picture floating in darkness, a ring of light surrounded by storm clouds. He gasped. "I've seen it. In my dreams." Varn nodded. "Then the sword remembers the way. But you must go soon. When the void reaches this world, nothing will remain." Elias took a deep breath. "I'll go, but I'm not going alone." Varn smiled faintly. "You won't. The stars have been waiting for you far longer than you think." That night the refugees of Zarthion gathered beneath the broken towers as the human walked through the crowd. No armor, no banners, just the sword glowing softly in his hand. The aliens whispered his name, the human of the flame, the chosen of the blade. Some reached out to touch his cloak, as if hoping that a trace of his courage might cling to them. He paused at the edge of the landing platform, where an old transport ship waited, patched, scorched, and trembling under its own weight. Varn stood beside it, already preparing coordinates. "Once you enter the Veil Nebula," Varn said, "communications will fail. Time will distort. The sword will show you what it needs to, but it will also test you." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Test me how?" The elder's eyes dimmed. "By showing you the one thing even heroes fear most, the truth about themselves." Before Elias could respond, the ground shook violently. The clouds split open. From the heavens, a colossal ship descended, its surface a shifting sea of black metal, its engines glowing like the hearts of dying suns. The Void Empire had arrived. Panic rippled through the crowd. Energy beams lanced down from the sky, shattering towers like glass. The shockwave threw Elias and Varn to the ground. The sword screamed in his hand, and for the first time since he'd lifted it, Elias felt pain, sharp, electric, like 1,000 voices crying inside his head. A deep, echoing tone filled the air. Then a voice, booming from the sky. "Elias Ward, heir of the Builders, return the blade, and your world will be spared." Elias rose, fire burning in his eyes. "You've destroyed half the galaxy for that blade," he shouted. "Why should I believe you'd spare anyone?" The voice laughed, a cold mechanical sound that vibrated in his bones. "Because your kind never learns mercy until it begs for it." A black beam fired from the ship, tearing through the city's outer ring. Thousands vanished in light. Elias gritted his teeth, raising the sword. The weapon flared, meeting the beam mid-air. The collision split the clouds, casting a ring of blue fire across the horizon. The impact sent him to one knee, The sword's voice echoed in his mind, fierce and urgent. "Go, Elias, the forge awaits. If you stay, you will die, and so will every star that follows you." He turned to Varn. "Get them underground. I'll draw their fire." Varn grabbed his arm. "You can't fight a fleet." Elias smiled faintly. "I'm not fighting to win. I'm fighting to buy time." He sprinted toward the edge of the platform. The sword blazed brighter, its hum rising to a scream as he leapt into the air. A column of blue light erupted beneath him, lifting him skyward like a comet. He soared toward the enemy ship, one man against an empire. The alien fleet adjusted instantly, 1,000 cannons turning to track him. Lyra's voice whispered in his ear, "This is where they will remember you, Elias Ward." He raised the sword high as the sky ignited around him. Every shot that struck him turned into light, every wound sealed by the sword's burning fire. He broke through the first ship's hull in a flash of blinding energy. Metal screamed. The void itself seemed to tremble. And then, silence. A brilliant explosion swallowed the heavens. From the planet below, the people of Zarthion looked up and saw a single line of blue fire cutting across the stars, diving into the storm of the Veil Nebula. Varn watched, his eyes wet with both hope and fear. "Go, human," he whispered. "Go where none have returned." And far beyond the reach of an HFY star, through clouds of shifting light and fractured time, the human and his sword vanished into the veil, chased by the screams of the dying and by the darkness that had finally awakened. Because now, the void wasn't just coming for the galaxy, it was coming for him.